The release of Octopath Traveler 0 has finally arrived after what felt like an eternity. It's looking to be a very lengthy title as it's adapting most of the mobile game into a streamlined experience, so I compiled a bunch of tips and tricks to help out. Whether you're a returning player or starting out for the first time, there will be something to take away from this video. So to start us off, we have the starting items. One of the first things you'll see when beginning the game is the customization menu, and within that menu, you can choose a bunch of starting items for your character. This includes some accessories, consumables, and key items, and when I was playing through the demo, I made the mistake of taking the key items. My initial impression was that they would be important and not worth skipping because of how they were labeled. However, under no circumstance should you take the crested key, the letter fragment, and the emberglow mushroom, as you can easily obtain them after the prologue. The crested key can be found in a level 6 dungeon next to Theatropolis, which will be easy to go through as you'll be around that level by that point. It's also not behind any sort of boss or strong enemy, it's just lying on the ground for easy grabbings. You'll want to grab it as it's required to recruit Viator and Valor. The letter fragment can be found in Theatropolis where you recruit Alexia. It's just sticking out on the bookshelf, which is incredibly convenient. And the emberglow mushroom can be found after doing a character side quest for Macy, as you'll be able to inquire the young boy and you'll point out its location. Because of that, the best items to start out with are the accessories, as they're immediately useful and their scaling is fairly good, each giving a 10% modifier to their respective stats. The only other item that might be worth considering is the medium nourishing nut, as it gives a permanent HP boost for a decent amount. The nourishing nut gives 150 permanent HP to the ally that consumes it, and while that alone may not seem worth it, it can then be combined with the nourishing nut that you can obtain in the prologue, effectively giving any character 225 extra HP to work with, which is pretty significant. It'll most likely be the case that nuts will either be limited or incredibly difficult to farm, just like in the first 2 mainline games, so it's best to assume that it's the case here. But if it's not worth it to you, then taking the accessories is still the best choice in the end. You also get to choose a favorite dish in this part, and it really doesn't matter too much. They all restore 10% of the party's maximum HP and SP plus any stat of your choosing. You could just pick whichever one you like the most, but if you don't care, then taking a dish that boosts an attack set is always a safe bet. Next, there's the action skills and mastery skills, and you get to choose between 3 of them to start out. Starting with the action skills, you get to choose between Twin Shot Mastery, Weaken Foundation, and Healing Prayer Mastery. Out of these 3, you should take Weaken Foundation. Twin Shot Mastery is a 22 SP move that lets the equipping character hit twice with any physical weapon they can equip. However, not only is the SP cost too high for what it is, but many of the starting characters already come with multi-hit moves. This isn't even including the starting job of the protagonist, as many of those also have multi-hit moves as well. Meanwhile, Healing Prayer Mastery is a 12 SP move that restores HP and 10% of the target's SP, but it's not that amazing. It's mostly just a more expensive single target healing move, which isn't bad per se, but there's plenty of ways of restoring SP and HP at a lower cost. Weaken Foundation is the best starting choice of the 3 because not only is it incredibly cheap to use at 6 SP, but supportive options are extremely limited early into the game. Being able to debuff both physical attack and defense for that cheap is incredible, and it can make some characters and jobs so much stronger. I would heavily recommend taking this action skill. As for the mastery skills, you get to choose between Eye for an Eye, Greater Heal Mastery, and BP in Adversity. Eye for an Eye isn't bad per se, as it grants a 50% chance to counter physical moves when targeted, but it's not only RNG, but it can mess up break patterns depending on the equipped weapon. BP in Adversity is much more niche, as it requires being near death to get the benefits of it. A player character can restore 2 BP every turn if you meet the conditions, but not only is it incredibly difficult to set up, but it's a liability for long-term battles. Greater Heal Mastery is just the best choice of the 3 mastery skills, as it's simply a standard bonus effect. It raises the amount of restored HP and SP from a character's recovery skills, and that will always be useful. I would definitely recommend taking Greater Heal Mastery over the other 2. I skipped a bit ahead to talk about the mastery skills, but you don't get to choose those until after the prologue, so to dial it back a bit, let's talk about this part real quick, as there's several items that you can miss out on. A lot of the items are fairly negligible for the most part, some being mediocre gear and some resources for Wishvale, but there are genuinely good items worth grabbing before you progress through the prologue. This includes the 300 leaves that you can find in your room. It's a bit hard to see, but it's next to the stairs. A nourishing nut from your mom, which is worth grabbing for the extra bit of HP, especially if you grab the starting item. A fire soul stone from the carpenter, which is incredibly convenient for flat damage dealing, and the lightning earring from Lorana, which gives you a bit of an evasion boost. The last one isn't as important, but all of these combined are very much worth grabbing, and you can completely lose access to them if you don't contend them from the right NPCs. After all the prologue stuff is said and done, you can then freely travel outside of Wishvale, and it's highly recommended that you recruit as many people as possible, as it will make battling and obtaining items items from NPCs so much easier. You could get Alexia, Viator, Kelsis, and Macy almost immediately after the prologue as long as you visit their respective towns. Viator and Kelsis can be recruited in Valor, with Viator requiring the Crested Key. That's why I recommend going over to Theatropolis first and recruiting Alexia, as she'll be your early game MVP. She has access to really strong magic and weaponry that can be easily obtained by contending the 2 NPCs next to her recruiting area. It's also next to the dungeon holding the Crested Key, so it's worth going to her first. The other fast recruitable is Macy in Emberglow, and all she needs is an herb of fortification during her quest, which you can immediately buy in the item shop. It'll save you a trip back and forth if you just grab it before heading to the other side of the town. Getting these 4 will make battling a lot more smooth, and it will let you fast travel between the towns afterward. Fen is also recruitable after progressing a bit through the Wishvale storyline, and it doesn't take too long to get that going. That said, I would go and recruit everybody else before that point, especially Alexia. She's just really great to have for clearing random encounters really quickly. And speaking of which, there's the battling itself, which has a decent amount of things worth going over. The first and arguably most important would be with the weakness order. There are a total of 14 weaknesses in the game, the original 12 from Octopath 1 and 2, but now with the addition of tomes and fans from the mobile game. The weakness order remains the same throughout the entire game, so it's worth remembering the order. Sword, polearm, dagger, axe, bow, staff, tome, and fan for physical, and fire, ice, lightning, wind, light, and dark for elemental. It's a lot to remember on its own, which is why there's some tricks you could use to help you remember. In the gear menu, you'll notice the 8 physical weapon types in order, which also happens to be the same order found in battle. If you ever forget how it went, they can constantly remind you of the order, and it comes up in every single battle. Because the weaknesses are always in the same order across battles, it means you can infer weaknesses without even discovering them. For example, let's say there's an unknown weakness between swords and daggers. Well, because there's only one weapon type that exists between the two, you can infer that polearms is the weakness, as it's the only weapon type that comes after swords and before daggers. This also applies to any weakness past fans, as they can only be elemental weaknesses given the set order. Unfortunately, there's no easy way to remember the elemental order similar to the physical order, but you can always make up an easy way to remember it. For me, I call it the Philwild order since it somewhat rhymes, and rhymes are pretty easy to remember. There's probably easier methods, but that's what works for me at least. Fire, ice, lightning, wind, light, and dark, Philwild. It won't always be the case where you could completely narrow it down to one specific weakness, but even being able to remove several options from inference is still incredibly useful. It's also worth mentioning that when bosses change weaknesses during battles, any overlapping weakness will still be marked. This means if there's a bunch of new weaknesses that haven't been discovered, then it's going to be something that you haven't already used against them already. Similarly, if a weakness ends up swapping several times in a single battle, you won't have to rediscover those weaknesses. They'll just appear as if you already found them. Also, during battles, you'll notice that the game doesn't directly tell you an enemy's HP pool without using specific moves, but you can also infer how close you are to beating an enemy with some of the indicators. Just from the name of the foe alone, you could already infer how much HP they may have left. If their name is white, it means they still have at least over half of their health left. If their name is yellow, it means they still have between 25 and 50% of their health left. And if their name is red, it means their health is below 25% of their total HP. Similarly, you could use moves such as Collect and Steal against certain enemies to help determine how much HP a foe has left. Sometimes the moves won't work against certain bosses or enemies you already used it on or can't really collect or steal from, but in most cases it is available information. That said, the name indicator will be your best tool throughout the entire game. Optimizing your turns will also be a great way to shred through so many enemies. The normal battle sequences include breaking a foe and boosting to deal a bunch of damage, but there's more nuance to it than it may seem. This is where the defend action comes into play, as defend on any character will give them the ability to always act first on the next turn, unless an enemy is recovering from a break. This is incredibly useful as you can pace out when you want to break a foe by reducing the foe's shield count to as little as possible, and then defending with an ally that can target the foe's weaknesses. Breaking a foe at the start of a new turn means you could get significantly more actions in break time. It can mean the difference between a couple actions and an entire turn to set up and shred through a foe much more. I would highly recommend doing this if it is safe to do, as sometimes you won't have the option and you just need to break a foe for safety, but in the circumstance where you can stagger out your attacks, it's definitely worth doing so. Also, new to the mainline games is the ability to switch between the front row and back row in battle. After recruiting enough characters, you'll effectively have some on standby in the back row gathering BP each turn they're not really used. Characters in the back row also recover some of their HP and SP every turn on top of that. Because of that, you may want to consider pairing up high SP consuming allies with somebody that could pick up the slack as they recover in the back. This can also include pairing supportive characters to one another, as they can constantly swap between themselves and provide support each turn while keeping a steady supply of damage output and shield shaving. There's a lot that will open up as you get more characters and progress through the game, but it is worth at least keeping a couple of these things in mind. I'll most likely go into this more in a future video. But back to the main points, there's also the ability to flee battles, which is pretty standard for RPGs. However, there's ways of guaranteeing a flee, which can be really helpful if scouting out higher level areas. To guarantee a flee, you must break every single enemy on the field, or if you're lucky, getting a surprise on the foe encounter at the start of the battle. Breaking every foe in the field means you are guaranteed to escape, so it's worth fighting out some battles regardless, especially battles that have Caits, which are rare encounters that grant a lot of XP and JP when defeated. The caveat, however, is that they're really difficult to beat normally. They're prone to fleeing battles very quickly, they have no elemental weaknesses, and they have extremely low hit rates when using physical weapons. Because of that, your best bet would be the spam magic and soul stones, as they're guaranteed hits. Caits have low HP, which means a few hits will all but surely defeat them. I would make sure they don't run away first so that you don't end up wasting any resources. Also, for anyone who chose the hunter class, you can use ensnare to push their turn order to last on subsequent turns, which makes the process of beating them so much easier. Other than that, there's a few quick things I want to make mention of. The first one will come up often in dungeon exploring. You'll find torches in many of them that are there to lead you to a destination point. It's often best to divert from that path, as you'll end up finding treasure more often that way, and a lot of the treasure you find in dungeons ends up being really good or useful in some capacity. Stray off the path when you can. Similarly, you should consider going into higher level areas if you ever find one. Normally, you would just end up losing to overpowered enemies, which would discourage you from going further in. However, every time you enter an area, an autosave lets you reset by the entrance, so there's really no risk. I found this helpful almost immediately into the game, as there's a level 23 area next to Valor and a chest next to the entrance point containing a really strong dagger. You can also get Kelsis to help out, as his ability allows you to flee battles more often, and of course, you can break enemies to help out if need be. It's definitely worth exploring higher level areas, as there's no real downside. On that note, I would advise keeping up with Wishvale despite being a secondary objective, since it will contribute significantly to the main campaign. There are recruits locked to Wishvale progression, and some of the characters you can interact with in Wishvale can end up giving you really good items if you end up building their affinity. Not to mention, there are blue chests scattered across the game that will require the progression of Wishvale to unlock them. To that end, that also means you want to interact with as many NPCs as possible. Inquiring, contending, purchasing, and any other action besides talking with an NPC will increase your affinities that will help you obtain more powerful items down the road from stronger NPCs, and this should also make percent-based checks a lot easier. So whenever you enter a new town, it would be best to interact with everybody if you can. There's so much more of an emphasis with interacting now. And last, there's a quick snippet with the battle bonuses. Beating battles in specific ways can get you extra rewards after. Taking no damage gives you extra leaves, breaking or dealing too much damage gives you extra XP, and one-tapping or beating an enemy in one turn will give you extra JP. It's stuff that you'll naturally encounter as you play the game, but I figured I'd mention it anyway, just so you keep it at the back of your mind. And that should be about everything you need to know going into Octopath Traveler 0. This should help make early game much more manageable, or at least that's the goal. A lot of these tips should carry through the entire game, but it is intended to make the beginning a lot more smooth. Also, let me know what starting job you chose for your character, as I'll be back soon to cover the best available options. But until then, make sure to like and subscribe, and until next time, I'll see you later.